Here's what you missed this week on The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
And I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
Coming to you from these United States of America, here in the middle of the country, good old Iowa, between the two rivers. Here on Iowa Catholic Radio, The Uncommon Good is very happy to be with you. Depending on when you're listening, either happy soon-to-be Easter or very, 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 very happy Easter. He is risen indeed. I know people hit the show at different times, but either way, I hope that you realize and remember you have a duty to be happy and be festive here in Eastertide. But people know me, Bo Bonner, probably from the host of the Catholic Morning Show here on Iowa Catholic Radio. They know you how?
From dominating my bracket competition. No, not exactly. So right now I'm the Dean of Liberal Arts and Sciences at Mercy College of Health Sciences.
Right now.
Downtown Des Moines.
Yeah. Obviously, so happy to have you with us. Bud and I have been at it about 10 years, Iowa Catholic Radio about it for 20, but we want to say thank you to Imogene Ingredients for underwriting the show. Underwriters make all of these local shows happen on Iowa Catholic Radio, and we are very happy with ours. Thank you, Imogene Ingredients, for making it all possible. But it is always fun sometimes to take a break in our series to interview people. It's especially great when the interview makes tons of sense. We're going to be speaking to old Uncommon Good All-Star Christopher Altieri. He's the managing editor of Crux Now, but his new book, Leo XIV, The New Pope and Catholic Reform, man, it really hits the spot for what we've been talking about with leadership reconsidered.
Yeah, I've kind of wondered if you watch like the late night shows, they have to have guests day after day. And so I'm sure occasionally they get a guest where I'm like, I'm not thrilled about this book, but I will say with Chris, that is certainly not the case. This book is very fascinating. It's kind of crazy to think we're up about 1 year on the Leo pontificate, so I'm looking forward to this one.
You will want to look forward to it as well, my friend. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. So wonderful to have you with us. Happy Easter. He is risen. Or if you're hearing this right beforehand, he's almost risen, depending if this is Saturday or Sunday and you're listening. Folks, we have a special guest today that we're looking forward to getting a chance to speak with. The book that is out that he's written, Leo XIV, The New Pope and Catholic Reform. He is the managing editor of Crux Now. Chris Altieri, thank you for coming back on the Uncommon Good.
Thanks, guys. It's great to talk to you both.
So the book you wrote, I want to say something that how it connects to this general arc we've been working on. So Bud and I lately have been doing the Reconsidered Leadership. We had a series in 2022 where we really got in depth about what Catholic leadership should look like. We are reconsidering it as well, going over our old episodes and expanding them. And funny enough, when we have talked to you, Chris, about talking about this book, coming on and doing an interview, it fits perfectly in what we're doing. Of course, talking about Pope Leo XIV, not only his biography, but what it means to lead a church with church reform being at the sort of top of everyone's mind. And that's what I think I appreciate so much about this book. To let people know, yes, there is biographical elements about Leo XIV in this book, but in some ways what you wrote was a book about what was facing Leo XIV as he took over as Pope. And now a year on, I would say that many of the things you said, not only prescient, but only more so becoming the case. So when you wrote this book and you published it, how did that come about right around the time when a new Pope was being elected?
Well, Dominic Matos at Bloomsbury Continuum reached out in May of last year asking whether I could write a biography. And I told him, no, I couldn't. And I also told him that I couldn't write a biography that was going to be ready for publication by September of that same year.
Right.
That was the real point. And he needed a manuscript in 2 months. I told him I didn't think anybody could do it. I wasn't quite right about that. I have to say, my Crux colleague, Elise Ann Allen, has put out a marvelous piece of work, which is now available in English. She wrote it in Spanish. She had the Peruvian connections and ties and a list of sources long as her arm, and was able therefore, to put a full biography together, and I should say I heartily recommend that. What I pitched as an alternative and something that I knew I could turn around and something with which I knew I could do a good job, and not to toot my own horn, I think a better job than just about anybody going, was a book that, gave a a biographical sketch of the man, but really focused on the mind of the cardinals heading into conclave, what issues were top of mind for the men who would be choosing the next pope, and that shades perceptibly, I think, into what is in fact what I could describe as the papal in tray. You know, what was the new guy, whoever he was going to be walking into on day one. Knowing that, well, then you can start to develop a profile of the sort of fellow that you might be looking for if you were a cardinal elector, right? And so that's the process, and that's what I did. That's what I went about it.
We've been talking about for a few weeks now that if we're going to talk about leadership in the Catholic key, it has to be like Jesus in the Philippian hymn, pouring yourself out, being willing to empty yourself into the role and the office of whatever you're walking into. Having that in mind for our show, when I read your book and reapproached it, you almost wanted to hand this book to whoever would be Pope and say, this is what was waiting for you. When it comes to being, a journalist and being able to look in, investigate, ask people, talk to sources, is maybe that's something that you find is the real trick to having journalism that really helps. It was rather than just describing things as it were, trying to talk about the sort of the cavity, the sort of shape that when these events begin to happen, this is the thing that people are going to walk into, as it were.
That's a really good question. And the short answer is yes, of course, right? But the real trick to it is recognizing something that the church knows in her bones, right? And that I think is true mutatis mutandis for any society and for any endeavor, for any beat certainly, and for leadership in any sort of organization, right? And that is that from the inside looking out, the concerns are often very different, right? I remember, if I may, being live to air when Leo had been elected, and I don't quite recall, without my notes in front of me, whether we'd already met him, right? I think whether we'd already heard that it was him, but it was on May 8th, the day of his election, and we were live to air. I think we'd already heard that it was Leo, and one of the questions from the studio was, is Leo going to continue in the progressive vein of Pope Francis? What are his main sort of opinions and ideas at the crossroads of theology and sociology, if I could put it that way. That wasn't the precise words of the question, but that was the gist of it. And I think my interviewers were surprised with my response, because I said that, he's going to be worried about the administration of justice, and he's going to be worried about the financial crisis that the Vatican is in right now. Doctrinal problems tend to take care of themselves. It's a long and a messy process, but they do. But somebody's got to keep the lights on, and that's the Pope's job. I think that we sort of default to familiar controversies, familiar questions, familiar problems. Whether those are, women deacons, or how to minister to people with same-sex attraction, or what have you. These are things that are subjects that people hear discussed, and so just assume that they're going to be top of mind for the people who are actually in charge of the church. But the real practical nuts and bolts of governing, that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where the concerns are. And so I try at once in the book to demystify and also to reframe and to look at things, to help readers look at things from the cardinal's point of view.
Yeah, Chris, this ties into that idea, but I think in the book you do a fine job of sort of quickly painting a picture of the Francis pontificate. And what kind of struck me is he encompassed certain tensions. So could you speak to maybe how he was perceived by the media and those outside of the church versus maybe how he was received by cardinals and curial figures? You mentioned that Francis was sort of a media darling and at times perceived as like a figurehead for the cultural elites, but that maybe wasn't necessarily, the experience of those who were closest to him as advisors.
Oh, sure. And he was often, viewed as a progressive figure, and this is, from people in the larger sort of the mainstream of culture, right? An imperfect progressive, a progressive interrupted, I think I put it at one point. But I don't think that label really ever fit him very well. And for a host of reasons that, we don't really need to rehearse. Mm-hmm. But my concern with the Francis pontificate and with any pontificate is, with the Pope as governor of the church, right? And his pontificate, Francis's pontificate, whatever you think of it, right? And whatever you thought of it, it was exhausting to the people who are in the Curia in Rome and who have the leadership of the church in places around the world. His unofficial slogan or motto was Hagan Leo, right? Make a mess.
Right.
And he led by example in those regards, right? Keep them guessing was his style of government. And a style of governance, I should say. And that can, and in fact did during the Francis pontificate, release enormous energy, right? But it also therefore tends to dissipate quickly when it's released all at once like that. And a governor really does need to harness and to direct energy. So folks in Rome had a hard time because they never knew what was coming down the pipeline. It might be the opposite of what came down 2 weeks earlier. And folks were ready, even folks who were broadly sympathetic to Francis and to his program, such as it was, folks were ready for a little regularity, to get back to a sort of a settled pace of things and to knowing what was expected and how things ought to get done.
Mm-hmm. One thing that was kind of a trope during conclave, and it was spoken about a lot after Leo was elected, was this idea that leading up to the conclave, it would not be someone from the U.S. and it would be a bad idea to tie the soft power of the papal office to the hard power of the U.S. with its cultural clout and things. Now we're almost a year in, and Leo he's facing some complicated conversations when you think about America's presence on the international scene. How do you think that has gone? Do folks still kind of look on him as the first American pope, or has the way he's governed sort of shifted the way that we think about those matters?
Well, if I may, Leo is not the first American pope. Leo's the first pope born in the United States. Francis was the first American pope. And I think that is not an indifferent point. That said, you're absolutely right to point to the very surprising election of someone from the United States. And, in the book, I mention the remark most often attributed to the late, great Francis Cardinal George of Chicago, who said that no one would be elected from the United States until the United States entered permanent political decline. So the election of Leo has would-be readers of the Signs of the Times wondering whether that little bit of homespun wisdom has been tossed by the wayside, or whether it's been confirmed, or whether those are even mutually exclusive options. But here we are, and these certainly are interesting times.
When you start to think about the papacy and the way that you are approaching it in the book, which is not to say that there's a true papacy and then there's like the one that's that people are familiar with. The papacy is many things all at once. It is, like you said, theological and plays that role in the sort of teaching office of the church. It's ecclesiastical. It is certainly popular and in the media. And then, of course, what you're saying is about the governance of the church itself, Rome, particularly Vatican intrigue, but then, of course, the worldwide church. It doesn't make sense to say one is true and the rest aren't, but it is fair enough to say certain ones get put under the microscope and given prominence more maybe than others, which either neglect facts on the ground about the Pope and the Church, or at least we want to say maybe cloud our vision about what that starts to look like. So when you have someone like Leo, who in his various roles has had very practical demands to actually govern and rule in different circumstances. On one hand, that is the aspect of your book that gets into, as it were, the biographical aspect about what he did in the past that would make people go, oh, this guy actually knows how to sit down and, as it were, run things. But then how does that sort of portend to where the church is now, that maybe some of the most the worst bleeding, as it were, in just its sort of walk through history, and where the bleeding needs staunched is precisely in something like the day-to-day governance that often gets overlooked by people like us on the radio or just the popular culture in general?
Well, let me start by saying, first of all, that the church is an historical subject, right? The church is in history, and history has always been messy, and history is always happening. Anybody who reads the Acts of the Apostles as though it were a vade-mecum for good government is doing it wrong. It just isn't that. And the church is always muddled through, if I could put it that way. That said, I think it's fair to say that the Cardinals, when they looked at their own number and were trying to sort of figure out, well, what sort of fellow do we need right now after this, 12-year whirlwind of a pontificate under Francis? I think they were going to be looking for somebody who was, and I know they were looking for somebody who understood how and understands how the machinery of Roman government works, right? But who wasn't a cog in the machine, if I could put it that way, right? Not a curial lifer, but someone who's close enough to the curia to know how it works and how it is supposed to work. On that point, and on several others, someone who understands the global footprint of the church and the international presence of the church, but who isn't a career diplomat. Someone who is capable of holding an audience in several different languages, but doesn't crave the limelight. Someone who's going to be willing, nevertheless, to stay home and govern, but isn't a shrinking violet. You know, all of those boxes Leo ticks, right? Better than anybody else in the college. I hadn't considered Leo, or the man we call Leo, Robert Francis Prevost, as a possibility simply because he was from the United States, and I didn't think they were going to go that way. But the Cardinals obviously got over any concerns that they had about that. He's also a fellow, by the way, who was known to have stood up to Francis when it counted, when he was an Augustinian and the head of the Augustinians, which I should mention also because that's another box to tick. Leo had already been in charge of a global missionary society, the Order of St. Augustine, right? And had been a missionary himself, both as a priest and later as a bishop. Francis named him to the Diocese of Chiclayo. So all of that was, in his resume, and the Cardinals who were in the room knew that about him. It was also known that Francis is the man who raised the man we now call Leo, brought him back to Rome, gave him his red hat, gave him a very important billet in the Curia. He was the prefect of the Congregation for Bishops. I'm sorry, I should say the dicastery for bishops, right? So he really did fit the profile almost uncannily well. And I sort of kicked myself for not giving him shorter odds than I did. But in fairness to me, Leo himself didn't think that he had much of a chance heading in, right?
Right. And I think this is interesting too. We're about 2 minutes from the break, so I don't want to open up another can of worms. But I think to sort of land the plane here with this first segment, it's interesting how much when we think about where we are in the church and where we are globally, that you start to imagine possibilities of who is papal. So, of course, in the United States, we think about it in very political terms. We think about it as okay, well, who's going to choose one side of these sort of debates or others? And we don't mean to, but we make Democrats and Republicans out of the worldwide church, and we go, well, one person won, so they're going to go back on these others. But to show that there's a completely different way to think about how something like governance works just in its practical day-to-day operations, it's, as you said, when you lay it out in the book as you did, I'm with you. I had no clue about Robert Prevost. So when I read this, I go, man, how didn't far more people know about this? But it's, as you said, people in the world church really did, and precisely because of that last role he had, getting to talk with the bishop. So right here before the end, like I said, a minute and a half, do you think that started to be the linchpin that allowed him to be imagined by so many people as the Pope?
I think that what really clinched it was, he'd spent half his life, maybe a little more than half, outside of the country of his birth. And there have been a few cardinals who have been quoted to the effect that he was the least American of the U.S. Cardinals who were in the room, and that isn't insignificant, right? And it bears mention that he was a naturalized Peruvian citizen too. Now, there's an interesting reason for that as well, and it's that the Concordat between Peru and the Holy See stipulates that all local ordinaries, all local bishops in Peru need to be Peruvian citizens. So Leo, or Robert Prevost, when he was named a bishop, originally was apostolic administrator of Chiclayo for about a year while his citizenship paperwork got processed. And it was only after he obtained citizenship that he was installed as bishop of the diocese. So and if you listen to him talk, and he's made absolutely no secret of this, nor have the people to whom he served as shepherd for many, many years. They love him very, very deeply and very sincerely, and he loves them very, very much.
Absolutely. Well, so we hit the end of the segment here. We'll get back more with Chris Altieri, managing editor of Crux Now, with his new his book that's been out for a bit about Leo XIV. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Budmar, stick around. We'll be back right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Budmar joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. So wonderful to have you with us. We are interviewing right now Chris Altieri. He's the managing editor of Crux Now, the new book, Leo XIV, the New Pope and Catholic Reform, continuing talking about all of its insights. Chris, thank you again for coming on The Uncommon Good.
Thanks, guys, for having me.
So if we're going to keep this up about, what does it mean to understand the papal office and its actual governing structures and its sort of reality on the ground, but also think about how Leo XIV, who might have been a sleeper in terms of people understanding him as a possible pope, that one of the things that really shapes his life to answer a lot of these questions, like you said, the things that the cardinals knew that would have to be asked and addressed, part of this is the Augustinian roots of Leo XIV. So what is it about being an Augustinian that made the approach to precisely the pressing questions of the papacy in the here and now make such a fit in the minds of the cardinals?
That's a fantastic question. The short answer is everything, right? Having said that, I think we could probably narrow it down a little bit without too much trouble. And realizing that, St. Augustine of Hippo, the great bishop and doctor of the church, was writing the foundational works of what has come to be called Christendom, and absolutely, immortal works of the spiritual life in his Confessions, and what is really the founding work of systematic Catholic political theology, the De Civitate Dei, on the city of God against the pagans, right? He was writing at a time of immense civilizational and social upheaval within a few generations, less than 100 years of the collapse of Roman power in the West, and was discerning the place of the church in history vis-a-vis these civilizational forces and powers that were at work in the world, and the perduring influence of Augustine is nowhere, I think, more greatly felt than in his fascinating anthropology. The deep reflection that he does, that he offers us, that is an inexhaustible gift, not only to the church, but to anyone with a soul, really, on human nature. And that we have an Augustinian elected to the See of Peter, which still is to this day the office that is a universal moral reference point in the world, right? One of the offices that's the biggest bully pulpit in the world, that's for sure, and really is genuinely super partes, right? In a world that is increasingly fragmented and polarized. To have a fellow like that steeped in the relentless and ruthless soul searching that is the hallmark of Augustinian spirituality, and the hard-nosed optimism, if I could put it that way, of the Augustinian who never tries to sugarcoat our brokenness, so that we can see and understand our greatness the more fully, and the greatness of our Redeemer more to the point. It just can't be an accident. If you go in for such things as providence, and I suppose I do, you could put it in that key and in that register. I don't think that was lost on the Cardinals either.
I'm kind of an aficionado for church news, and the news cycle seems a little slower under Leo. He one of his great skills, I think, is just being a careful listener. Do you? It's always a little dangerous to portend the future, but it feels like his vision for reform is very structural and carefully laid out. Do you see an acceleration of any sort of interventions, or is this kind of Leo's DNA?
No, I think that what we see in Leo is a fellow who listens deeply. You're absolutely right. He is going to be deliberate. He will work with all deliberate speed, I think. To say that he goes slowly doesn't mean that he's not moving with alacrity, but he's the sort of fellow who measures twice, right? The old expression, measure twice, cut once.
Yes, right. Of course.
Sorry. Yeah, Bo and I were looking at each other.
Yeah. I mean, you're right to ask, because we're not like good with like wood or anything, but we do know that.
All right. Well, measure twice, cut once, right? And Leo definitely is the sort of fellow who measures twice. He also is very good, and was when he was head of the Augustinians, at identifying talent and empowering talent to do the needful, to pick the right man for the job, and then to get him the resources, and then to get out of his way. Now, bringing that to the Roman Curia, that's going to take some doing. And he's not the sort of fellow who's in a rush to do everything at once. Now, there are lots of people who are very impatient to see reform happen, and I sympathize with them. I get it, right? But Leo also strikes me as the sort of fellow who is going to be strong enough to resist the temptation to do something, right?
Right.
So his pontificate, I think, is going to be one that we need to study and observe carefully, and that we need to allow to unfold at its own pace. And we need not to expect that he do everything all at once or anything on our time. He is a fellow who understands he understands that it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Right. You have this whole chapter on reform of justice, and what does that sort of look like? You mentioned that phrase, measuring twice and cutting once. What sort of issues is the Holy Father measuring right now in that area of the Church's life?
Oh boy, that's a huge one, and it's a generational project. It's not the work of a day, that's for sure. It's not the work of a pontificate. I think that Leo's background in canon law, I know that his background in canon law and his experience also as a judge, these are things that informed the cardinals' deliberations and ultimately their choice of him. He understands how government is supposed to work. He understands the nature and the purpose, hence the limits also of law as it's written on paper. And he understands that that laws neither apply nor interpret themselves, right? The biggest challenge facing him, and the biggest challenge facing anybody, is that the Church right now doesn't have a really independent and fully functional system of ecclesiastical justice, right? We have courts, we have the rudiments of it, but making things like making judges to serve during good behavior rather than at the behest of the Pope or a local ordinary or something like that. The training and staffing of the tribunals, the number of clerks, the ability to handle caseload. There are, I think right now, 17 full-time employees in the discipline section of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith that handles serious cases of abuse against minors. And that's an office that has a worldwide billet. Right? They have responsibility, either direct or indirect responsibility for a global organization with over 1 billion members and over 500,000 clerics of various ranks. There are prosecutors' offices in rural Mississippi that are better staffed and better funded. The budget is significantly less than €1 million a year.
Forgive me for making a bold statement. People have often pointed out, obviously, Leo XIV choosing that because of Leo XIII, and rightly so, something I'm very interested in because of this idea that we're going through another Industrial Revolution-esque moment when it comes to technology. But what I actually think is very interesting, and I wonder how much he meant this or not, both of their predecessors, I have argued, are far more alike than people like pointing out. I have said that Francis oftentimes will sound like Pio Nono himself, Pius IX, when it gets into especially things he's concerned about. I've argued that if you've read Laudato Si, half of it could be written by Pius IX if he was in the right mood. What I'm actually getting at, though, is when Pius IX does things like the Syllabus of Errors, or when he wrote some of the things that he did, people around the world could often understand sort of like what he wanted to change and what needed to take place because of the big revolutions happening in Europe. But a lot of people go, how are you going to get operative about what Pius IX wants to do? And it really took Leo XIII, who had all of this experience and had a long pontificate, to sort of set in motion a real way in which the church could embody what it was that Pius IX was worried about, but in a way that made, changes that we are still benefiting from and dealing with to this day. And Leo XIII, sort of used the encyclical, as it were, to make this sort of a reality. And I sometimes wonder if that is what already seems to be happening with Leo XIV, that whatever else Pope Francis, like you said, how people interpret him or whatever, he certainly spoke to this time in the church when people said there are big changes afoot. There are things like the justice reform that just have to happen if we're going to be able to make it work. But it really took someone, it's going to take someone like Leo XIV to make a plausible, realistic, real chance for that to stick in a way that maybe the person who's more prophetic can see it doesn't necessarily have, as it were, just not only the sort of natural capacity to do so, but also not really like the time delivered where that could happen. And I wonder if that is one way where Leo XIV is going to end up being a lot like Leo XIII.
Wow, that's really well spotted, and I think a very, very insightful observation. And I got to give you credit for it. Wow, that really is well spotted.
Thank you.
Now,
I appreciate it. No, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, no, going back to the point though, and to the one of the criticisms, and I think it's a fair criticism of the Francis pontificate, especially when in the area of ecclesiastical justice, is that Francis liked to put his finger on the scales of justice, right? And you saw this in cases like that of Bishop Gustavo Oscar Zanqueta, the Argentinian bishop. The details of those cases, of his case, of the disgraced celebrity former artist priest or former Jesuit, still a priest, Marco Rupnik. Yep. That we're still waiting on news of a verdict in that case, and that has been one that has caused persistent global scandal and outrage, really, for I think fairly a lot of very good reason. Now, whoever Francis's successor was going to have to deal with that particular case and with others that are still in the works. But you don't solve a problem, if not created, then exacerbated by a headman putting his fingers on the scales of justice by putting your finger on the other side, right? Because when a leader has his fingers on the scales of justice, that leads to problems. And so how do you fix that problem? And how does one achieve a truly independent and functional judiciary in a system that has a single unified executive, legislative, and judicial authority? It's a conundrum, right? If there's anybody who can take a crack at it, though, I think the Cardinals picked their man very well.
Well, and I mean, to continue,
but don't expect him to do anything drastic right away, or to try to solve the problem in one fell swoop. Because there is no Gordian knot to cut.
Yes. Well, and I mean, but you're the 19th century guy, so I don't mean to step on your toes, but I think about your Cardinal Newman experience and precisely what he sort of felt in the middle of the sort of Pius IX into the Leo XIII reign. Certainly Pius IX put his thumb on a lot of scales in the church-state debate, and that really took, calmer heads to prevail about what to do after that. So, to me, you tell me if the analogy holds at all.
No, I think that's a really creative lens to look at it, and I'm probably going to steal that if you don't put it into print soon.
Well, we'll have to figure that out. Yeah, we'll dice it out.
It ties into my next question, and that is, Chris, Pope Leo has continued to talk about synodality, and this was a really important idea for Pope Francis. I find in conversations with other Catholics that sometimes this idea can be anxiety-inducing. Like in an Eastern context, there's sort of a precise definition of synodality. I think Pope Francis had something very specific in mind, but some folks in the pews, they hear that and they're like, well, which direction is this headed? What does it mean in terms of how the church makes decisions? Now, that being said, near the end of the book, you have a conversation about the limits of papal governing power. And I think this is an interesting entry point. Some people look at the church as very monarchical and top down, very heavy in that manner, heavy-handed. But there are these different nodes of power. And especially since the Second Vatican Council, there's been a lot of conversation about the sense of the faithful as a key voice in the church's discernment. How do you see those issues hashing out? Maybe what does synodality mean for Leo? I know that's a big question. And maybe how should our listeners think about some of the limits of papal power? It's not like the Pope can wave a wand over certain things and just make them disappear or resolve themselves.
Well, we know because Holy Mother Church teaches us in the dogmatic constitution Pastor Aeternus that the Pope enjoys supreme and immediate authority over all of the churches and all of the faithful, right? That does not mean that other bishops, other members of the faithful, other people do not have other churches, right, besides the Church of Rome. It doesn't mean they don't have rights that the Pope is bound to respect. Quite the opposite. And there is a difference between, if I could put it this way, and I mean this in a very, very strict technical sense, there is a difference between absolute power and total power.
Right.
And Leo understands this very, very well. He has already made that abundantly clear. whether it has been in his discourses on the natural law, his remarks to the Curia in the very early days, in the first couple of weeks of his election. He met the Curia and he thanked all of the curial officials, which was something that they didn't hear very often during the reign of his immediate predecessor. And he recognized something else that was absolutely crucially important to those who assist the Holy Father in his work of government. And it is that the Curia, and Leo, when he said the Curia, he made it also and was explicit on the point. He was speaking directly to the Roman Curia, but he meant also the diocesan Curiae, the chanceries, right, around the world. And by the way, the Roman Curia is nothing other than a very big and a very old chancery that's been around in one form or another ever since St. Peter looked over his shoulder, whether it was his right or his left, I don't know, and said, "Hey, somebody take a letter." That's how long the Roman Curia has existed. But he said, "You are the memory of the bishop. You preserve the institutional memory of the see," right? And that was an idea that got very short shrift during the reign of Francis. In fact, some high-profile commentators during Francis's pontificate, which was a reforming pontificate, at least he was elected with a mandate to reform the Curia, spoke of the Curia as a mere organ of service to the will of the Roman pontiff. And I don't think anyone should contest the idea that the Curia is an organ of service. It is at the service of the Roman Pontiff, of the Holy Father, and of the Apostolic See, no doubt, right? But a mere organ of service? No, I don't think so. And Leo understands that, and he said so in words, and he's, I think, so far proven it. And that does make a real difference, especially over the long run.
Yeah, and we're wrapping up here, but to say that you can understand, not that what Pope Francis did was exactly letter book Ignatian and Jesuit, but like you can see the sort of tug and pull about how the Jesuits have understood themselves throughout time, being very on top of his mind about governance and what that means, and to have a superior and things like this. But the Augustinians and their push for unity, which we've heard so much from Pope Leo XIV in this short time, really does begin to speak in many ways to exactly everything that you've brought up in the book, the unity of person to situation and what that might look like going forward. The book is Leo XIV, The New Pope and Catholic Reform, out now by Christopher Altieri, the managing editor of Crux Now. Chris, thank you so much for coming on The Uncommon Good.
Thanks for having me, guys.
We appreciate it. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr. We'll be back right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. So wonderful to have you with us. Thank you, Imogene Ingredients, for underwriting the show. Bud, fascinating as always, but Chris Altieri, I really do suggest this book, Leo XIV, The New Pope and Catholic Reform. It is not so much a biography. I mean, it has biographical elements, but it really is just insightful understanding of where the church is and the sort of challenge of leadership that Pope Leo XIV hopefully is rising to the occasion to answer.
Yeah, I kind of appreciated Chris's honesty during that interview about he has this colleague who has kind of like the Peruvian angle down pat, but I think Chris is on the ground in Rome a lot and really seems to understand all the sort of like curial and cardinalatial sort of dynamics.
Well, when you're on the ground here in Iowa Catholic Radio, what are ways that people can join us in prayer?
So write these numbers down: 4:30 a.m., 6 a.m., 9 a.m., 8:30 p.m. Those are all times that we pray the Rosary. We pray the Chaplet of Divine Mercy at 2:57 in the afternoon. But you can also use the Iowa Catholic Radio app to pray the rosary anytime, anywhere.
And folks, at any time, you can go to iowacatholicradio.com to hit the donate button or call 515-223-1150 during business hours to donate. We thank everyone who provides prayers, who volunteers, but very much it is also the case that when you give materially, you make shows like ours possible. All the local shows, all the national feed, we need your help. iowacatholicradio.com to donate or 515-223-1150. But as always, absolutely wonderful. Happy Easter, my friend.
Yeah, blessings on your Eastertide.
This is The Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, our family, our city, state, nation, solar system, galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is The Uncommon Good. And one more time, from the bottom of our hearts, Happy Easter. Make sure to celebrate. We want to say He is risen. He is risen indeed. Yep. We'll be back next week.